Hey everybody, what's going on? So we do a lot of trainings that are based on Microsoft technology. So for example, we do some trainings on hacking Active Directory, abusing Azure Active Directory or different Azure services. And what we've noticed is that a lot of students that are newcomers or absolutely new beginners to the field of information security and cybersecurity do struggle a little bit with PowerShell concepts and PowerShell essentials. So when we're delivering these trainings, what we've noticed happen is that these students try to catch up with what's going on when we are running these tools, and they start falling behind bit by bit, and by the end of the first day or the beginning of the second day they become a little bit too frustrated. Things are not working out, tools are not running properly, and they start wasting and losing precious time and money. So what I wanted to do in this video is sort of share with you the absolute essentials, the absolute must-have basic skill sets when it comes to PowerShell. Now, this is quite an important skill to have. By no means this is going to be a comprehensive course. I'm gonna try and keep this as compact as possible, but what I want you to have is these absolute must-have skill sets to be able to understand the basics of PowerShell and run with some basic knowledge the common tools that, or the tool sets that we use when we're doing pen testing or we're doing assessments for Microsoft-based environments. All right, so without any further ado, let's get you started. Now, if you've never used PowerShell at all before, here's a quick introduction about PowerShell. Now, PowerShell is two things. It is a command line tool and it's a scripting language. What that means basically is that if you've ever used a Linux bash shell or Linux Z shell, or if you use the command prompt in Windows, this is what a command tool or what a command utility is. You can run commands, do things like create a directory, delete the file, so on and so forth. Now at the same time, yes, PowerShell can do that, but on top of that, what PowerShell can also do is that you can use it to create some fairly complex, sophisticated scripts. So it's not just a command line utility. You don't just use it to run commands on the command line, which you can do, and it does a wonderful job with that, but you can also use it as a scripting language. The other thing that you can also do with PowerShell is that these commands you can run locally, but also you can run remotely. And this is quite common in Windows administration environments. So Windows admins use this quite a bit. They use PowerShell to run commands remotely on remote systems, change certain configurations, do tasks, so on and so forth, provided of course they have the appropriate privileges, credentials, and so on. Now this is important for you as well as a pen tester or as a security assessor, because you could use the same concepts, PowerShell remoting, to compromise systems, run commands on systems remotely as well. With PowerShell, we have a few really distinct features. The first one is that it has a built-in help. Whenever you want to run a command that you don't know much about, you want to find out more, how do you want to run this command, you could use the built-in help. Now, obviously, you can always go and Google stuff, right? But it would be nice if from the command prompt, you are able to run a help command and get some basic help information at least. The other feature that we're going to be learning a little bit today about is the pipeline. So the pipeline allows you to take output from a command, the first command on the left side of the pipe, and then feed it as input to the second command. So here is the symbol for the pipeline. And we can see command 1, which is going to produce a certain output. We can take this output and use it as input to command 2. The third really cool thing about PowerShell as a feature is that it has aliases. So if you come, for example, from a Linux background, you would be familiar with commands like the ls. In Windows, an equivalent to that is dir. PowerShell has the same command, but it's named completely differently. Having said that, if you are coming from a Windows or a Linux background and you are familiar with commands like ls or dir, you can run these, and PowerShell will automatically know and understand what is it that you want to do and run this on your behalf. Of course, we're going to be seeing examples about all of this in a moment. Now, a little bit about the lingo that we use with PowerShell. So this is something that usually trips beginners off and confuses beginners a little bit. I've been saying commands, right? You run a certain command, you execute a certain command. If you want to be a little bit more accurate, in PowerShell, we call these cmdlets. Now, I'm going to be using these interchangeably in this video because it is a video for beginners and I don't want us to be overwhelming or overloading ourselves with information. But you need to know that when we mention a cmdlet, what we basically mean is it is a command that is native to PowerShell, built in with PowerShell. So when you get your Windows operating system with PowerShell pre-installed, or when you install a new version of PowerShell, it will come with a preset of commands. And these commands, because they are native to PowerShell, they are called cmdlets. Here are some examples. You're gonna notice that they are fairly easy to understand. Even if you've never used PowerShell before, they are going to be pretty straightforward. One of these cmdlets is the get location, and that will tell you where you're at right now in your operating system or in your file or directory structure. So let's actually try that. I'm gonna open the PowerShell prompt. If you've never done that before, all you have to do is hit the Windows key and type PowerShell. And when you see the PowerShell icon pop up, just click on it and it's gonna open a prompt that looks something like this. So you know that you are in a PowerShell command because you see this over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and try this, and I'm gonna say get location, and here we go. That tells me that I am right now in the D drive in a directory called Tariq, which is my name. And here's another example, a new item. What do you imagine this is going to do? Create a new item, exactly, right? So if I go and say new item, test1, and I go and do something such as get child item, which is basically dir or ls, you can see that I have now a file called test1. Another example is copy item. As you would imagine, this is going to copy the item from one location to another. Remove is going to delete it. Move it, it's going to move it instead of copying it. Rename, as the name suggests, it's going to rename it. So it's pretty straightforward, and you might have noticed as well that the naming convention for these cmdlets is standard and it's easy to understand. It is a combination between a verb and a noun. So I'm getting, which is a verb. I'm taking an action. I get, I remove, I move, I rename. It's usually always a verb, but what am I executing this verb on? Some kind of a noun. So I'm getting an item, I'm moving an item, I'm renaming an item, and so on. Now with PowerShell, we have some core cmdlets that are very useful for you to keep in mind. The first one is the get command. So this has multiple uses. The first use is that it will give you a list of all of the different commands and their aliases. So if you are new to PowerShell, you have no idea where to start, and you're just curious, you want to see what kind of commands can we use, you can go ahead and run something like this, get command, and that's going to list all of the commands that you have. Now you can see there's quite a bit, and let me stop this actually because I want to show you these. So you see this AZ, these are cmdlets for Azure. Because I work quite a bit with Azure, I'm going to have, or I do have on my system, these cmdlets. You might not have these if you are using PowerShell for the first time. But at least now I know that I have all of these cmdlets that I can use. Not only that, but I can also get different functions, aliases, and so on. So right off the bat, now I know what are some of the commands that I can use if I want to. And this is through the get command core cmdlet. Now we've mentioned also aliases, and we've seen some examples of these aliases like dir, which is the same as ls, which is the same as get child item. It's all exactly the same. Now how does that work? The cmdlet for PowerShell, the original cmdlet, is the get child item. However, it also has an alias, or in other words, a nickname, which is ls or dir. So if somebody is coming from a different background where they are used to running commands like ls or dir, they're not gonna struggle a lot for the transition into PowerShell. All of these will work. And if you want to see what are the aliases in my system or in your system, all you have to do is type get alias, and there you go. Here are all the aliases. So this, for example, is pwd, which is the alias for get location that we talked about, and you can see some other aliases as well over here. And this is how we're getting information about the commandlet. Now again, as a quick reminder, these commandlets are composed usually with a verb and a noun. So you can use the get command to look for certain verbs or certain nouns. Let's take an example. Let's say I want to delete something. I can do something along the lines of get command, and I'm gonna say show me anything with the name or a commandlet with the name del or delete. And you can see here that del is an alias that points to remove item. What if I don't know if this is called del or delete or remove? Like if I do something like this, that's not gonna work. It just gave me an error and it tells me that delete is not recognized as a name of a commandlet. So let's say I don't know what it's called and I want to start to look for commandlets that might point to delete or remove or something of this sort. And I can start to use this as a verb. I can say get command, verb, and remove. Now you see here, it's a very long list of different commands that I can use to remove a whole bunch of different things. Again, there's a lot of these that are relevant to Azure, so you might not be able to see these on your system. But what if I want to narrow it down a little bit? Can I maybe combine this with a noun? So maybe I want to remove a file, let's say. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't give me any result. So what I can do is maybe expand this search a little bit and use regular expressions. So maybe if I do this, now I'm getting a little bit more information. Remove file share, remove storage file, and a bunch of other commandlets over here. Maybe if I want to try the IR or directory, I can do something like this. Okay, and I have a different result. So now I start to understand, okay, I can use this to search for commandlets using the noun and the verb. Even if I am completely new to PowerShell, at least there's a starting point for me. You now identified what is the commandlet that you want to use. So maybe I want to use remove item. Now, if I hit enter, that's gonna ask me what is it that I want to remove. Maybe a file called 123, maybe a file called ABC, and if I hit enter a couple of times, it's gonna go and try to find these files and delete them. But obviously they don't exist, this is why it's throwing me an error. Now, instead of a little bit of trial and error, what I can do is I can do something such as get help and remove item. So give me the help menu for the remove item commandlet. And here we go. It's going to tell me that the syntax of how I use this, it's going to be remove item and the path of what is it that I want to remove. And notice here the aliases. This has 6 different aliases. RI, RM, RMDIR, all of these are aliases to the remove item. So let's give that a try. What was the file that we created? Test1. Let's say I want to remove item test1. And here we go. We're done. Get child item or dir or ls. It's all exactly the same. And here are some other examples. Go ahead and try them out on your own. So get command -name rm. That's going to give me pretty much the exact same thing. So get command -name rm. What do you imagine this is going to give? Rm is an alias to what? To remove item, which is exactly the same commandlet that we just used. If I want to search for a noun, I can try with regular expressions. If I want to search for, or if I want to get the help for a particular alias or a particular commandlet, we've seen an example, and you can either use -name or not use -name. And I particularly mentioned this here because this is something that sort of confuses students a little bit when they begin with PowerShell. So I can do something such as get help name rm, and that's going to give me the help for the rm or for the remove item. I can do exactly the same thing but without the name, and I'm going to get the same results. Okay, so both will work. Moving on to the next feature, which is piping. And this is one of my favorite features that I use all the time in Linux. I use all the time in PowerShell, and you see this quite a bit in PowerShell scripts as well. And as we've explained a little bit earlier, piping is basically when you take the output from the command on the left-hand side of the pipe and use that output as input for the second command, which is on the right-hand side of the pipe. And you can use piping as well with certain operators like the equals, So we are trying to see if the left equals the right. You can use it with a match. So if you want something to be a little bit more or less strict than just equals, because equal is strict, either equal or it doesn't. But if we are looking for a subset of a string, for example, we can use match, and we can use it with regular expressions. So let's take an example. Let's say I want to get the processes on my computer, but I don't want all the processes. I want a specific process, which is Explorer or Chrome or whatever it is. And I'm gonna take that output and pipe it into another commandlet or command, where I'm going to be selecting bits and pieces of the output. So let's see what that looks like. If I do get process, notice that there's a ton of data, and I don't want all of these processes. I just want a specific process. So I'm gonna say get process name, and let's go with Brave because I'm using Brave for the time being. Now see here, we have a bunch of different columns, but I don't want all of these. I just want, for example, the CPU usage. So here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the output, all of this output, right? And I'm going to pipe it into another command or commandlet, and it's gonna be select object. And the select object, I have to specify what is it that I want to select. So here I'm gonna say I want to select CPU, and I want to select process name. And here we go. I have the CPU and I have the process name selected. How did I do that? I took the output from one command, piped it into another command. Let's take another example. Now, instead of select object, I'm going to be using where object. So where object basically is going to take all of the output and sort of iterate through it and try to find something that matches what I'm looking for. Okay, so here I'm gonna go and say get process, and you know that this is going to be dumping a whole bunch of processes on my screen. I don't want that. I'm going to take all of that and pipe it into the where object. I don't want all of the output. I want something specific in the output. Now, what is the object that I'm looking for? I have to be specific. Am I looking for the process name, a particular CPU usage? Here in this example, I'm going with process name. Now, what's the process name going to be? I want it to be equal to, let's say, Explorer. And here we go. Now, instead of getting all of the output on my screen, I'm getting the output for the Explorer process only. Let's take one last example. And here, instead of using equal, I'm going to be using match. Why? Let's see why. If instead of Explorer, I type Explore, what's going to happen? Notice that I get nothing. If I type Explorers or whatever, I get nothing. I have to be very specific when I'm using the equal. It either equals or it doesn't. There is no in between. So if I want something a little bit more flexible, I can use the match. And match is going to look for a particular string. And if I try something like this, Explorer without the ER, notice that I get an output. Why? Because it's matching this kind of string over here. Okay, so that is a little bit more flexible than just the equals. There are a time and place where you want to use either or. So maybe you are looking for something very specific. This is when you would use equal. If you're not, or if you don't know what exactly you're looking for, you have a rough idea, maybe you want to use the match instead. So this is the power of piping, and obviously the possibilities for using piping are endless. We're going to do a quick exercise towards the end of the video, but this is one of the features that I personally absolutely love and I use all the time. All right, now that we know piping, let's go back to the core commandlets. I wanted to introduce you to piping before I introduce you to the second core commandlet, which is the get member. Now, when we look at commandlets like get process, you see, actually, let's just stick to that one on the screen. You see that we have CPU usage, ID, process name, and so on. But you know, and I know, there's a whole lot more information to processes than just this. Let's say, for example, you are doing an incident response. You see a weird process and you want to know what is the executable that spawned this process, from which path, where is the executable living. So you should be able to get the path of this process, but I cannot see it here, right? If I look at the titles over here, there is no path. What that tells me is that the output over here is truncated. Some of these cmdlets, they produce a ton of data, a ton of output. So whoever created this cmdlet decided that they're going by default to display certain most important sort of pieces of output. But the rest is still there. And if you want to get the rest of the output, or if you want to know what else can you get, you could use the get member. And this is why we learned about the piping in the previous section, because get member should be piped with the select object. So let's take an example. Here, if I do get process and I pipe it to get member, what I'm saying is, give me the get process cmdlet and show me all the members that belong to this get process. So here, we have something like CPU, which we've already seen. We know what it looks like, but we can also see the path, right? So we haven't seen the path before. Now I know that I can see the path. So how can I use this? This is what it looks like. So here I can say get process name. I'm going to specify the name. Let's go with Explorer. And I'm going to pipe it, select object. Remember the select object. So now I want to select something from the output. If I do this, what's going to happen? I cannot see the path, right? But if I want to see the path, I have to do select object, and we're using the pipe again. And what's the object that I want to do or that I want to use? I want the path. And here we go. So now I get the path of my Explorer process. Now you might have noticed that the output here is formatted as a table. In PowerShell, we have three main types of formatting: the list, the table, and the selective formatting, if you will. So the table is what we're looking at over here, right? So if I do this, but instead of Explorer, I'm going to use Brave, you see that I have a table of a bunch of different Brave browsers that are open. Right? Now, what if I wanted to format this in a different manner? Now, if I do this, let's try that actually. If I do format table, I'm gonna format it as a table. What's gonna happen? Nothing. It's exactly the same format. Why? Because the get process by default formats as a table. But if I change this to format as a list, now notice what happens. I can see this as different lists. So this bundle of information is relevant to one process. This is another process. Now it's no longer a table, it's a list. And the selective formatting you've already seen. So if I do again the same, and I do select object, CPU and path, here we go. This is the selective formatting. Now, all of this was a very quick introduction to the absolute essentials of PowerShell, but the most important section is yet to come, and this is where a lot of students get confused and get a little bit frustrated when we are trying to use new tools or new tool sets that don't come built in within PowerShell, that are not the default cmdlets or the native cmdlets within PowerShell. And this is where we use something called importing modules. Now, without dwelling too much on what's a module and what's a member, just think of a module as a bunch of different cmdlets, right? Or if you want to think of it as an easier way, think of it as a tool that somebody else created, using PowerShell, of course, and you want to use it. You cannot go and download from Microsoft. It doesn't download automatically with PowerShell, so you're gonna have to install it. Pretty much like you install any software in Windows. If you want to use, let's say, Office, you go and get the Office executable, double click on it, and it installs. In PowerShell, the installation is called importing, with a couple caveats. And the caveat that I was talking about is that when you import a module, it gets imported into your current session. In other words, if I do import module XYZ here, this is going to be imported in this current session. So if I go and close this, then I lose this import. I'm going to have to import it again. And if I don't import these modules, I will not be able to run the commands that I want to run from the tools that I want to use. So let's take an example. In our trainings, we use a tool set called PowerView, and it has a bunch of different modules and cmdlets that we use. One of those is called Get-Net-User. So if I open my PowerShell console now and I do Get-Net-User, that's not gonna work. I get an error. It tells me that this is not recognized. Why? Because I did not import the tool or install the tool that has this option. So what do I need to do? I need to run something such as this import module and the name of the module, and you notice here the extension is PS1. Now you will see different extensions: PS1, PSD1, PSM1, and so on. The easiest way to know which one to import is going to be by looking at the documentation, or you can follow the lazy approach and try your luck. Import whichever and see if it works or not. Of course, I do recommend that you look at the documentation. So let's try that. Let's say I want to import PowerView. So I'm going to try import module and PowerView. Now notice here that I get a certain error because this is a newer version of PowerShell, and it doesn't play very nice with PowerView. But let me try that again and hopefully it should work. Yes, now it works. So now if I do Get-Net-User, it works. I now have this command. I need to specify certain parameters and so on, but at least this now works. So the cmdlet is available for me to run. Now let me go ahead and open another PowerShell window or PowerShell session. And if I come here and say Get-Net-User, again, it gives me an error and it says, nope, not recognized. Sorry, you're gonna have to try something else, right? Why? Because like we said, when you import, it imports into your session over here. Okay, so let me close this and clear this. Speaking of importing, sometimes you might get an error like this that says that the module or the script that you're trying to load cannot be loaded because running scripts like this one is disabled on your system because of something that is called the execution policy. The execution policy basically is a feature that helps prevent users from running malicious scripts. PowerView that we just imported can be considered malicious, and as a matter of fact, a bunch of antiviruses and EDRs do consider it malicious. If it gets detected, you're gonna get some alarms and some alerts on your system. So the execution policy is a feature that is designed to stop the user from executing these malicious scripts. This policy can be set for either the user, the computer, or a specific session. So it could be pushed using group policies, for example, or by other means. And once it's set, that does not mean that it is set forever or set for good. Like I said, it's a feature. It is not designed to be a full-on security mechanism. So it is easy to bypass, which means that it is not specifically designed to restrict a user action. Think of it as just a bump in the road, like a stop sign that says, look, you're about to cross a crossing, stop, pay attention, look right, look left, and be careful when you're crossing, or slow down, go over the bump and make sure that you pay attention. But if you decide to, then you are able to bypass it, and it is fairly easy to bypass. And the way you would bypass it is by setting an execution policy to bypass. Now you see here we have a bunch of other options: signed, remotely signed, etc. And what that basically means is that you are allowed to run specific types of scripts that are, for example, signed by Microsoft or signed by a trusted author. But here, what we're doing is we are completely bypassing this. I get an access denied over here because to do this bypass, you need to run this, or you need to execute PowerShell as an administrator. So here, you notice that I'm running as an administrator, and if I set execution policy bypass, here we go. Now it works, and now I'm able to import and run whichever modules do I want. Let's take a couple more examples on how we can import some of these modules. So here, if I look at my directory, I have a bunch of different tools, the internals of a sweep and so on. So let's take a quick look. If I look at, let's say, import module AAD internals and then AAD internals as well, notice that I have a PSD1 and PSM1. What if I look, for example, at MFA sweep? So import module MFA sweep, and MFA sweep is a PS1. What if I go with MSOL? It's a PS1 as well. What if I go with microburst? This one is a PSM1, right? So you notice that we have different extensions of these imports that you want to do. So again, the easiest way to learn how you can set up a tool is by looking at the documentation, or you can just try your luck. So let's try our luck, and I'll show you how is that different from reading the documentation. Let me go with the first one, which is AAD internals. Actually, let's do another one. Let's do a quick and easy one. So import module, let's go with MSOL spray and MSOL spray, and if I hit enter, here we have it. Now it's imported. To use MSOL spray or pretty much any of these tools, usually, not always, usually it is invoke. So invoke MSOL spray. Okay, if I hit enter, that gives me an output. Now obviously I have to set some of the parameters, but I know at least it is working now. What if I want to import something else like microburst? So I'm gonna go with import module microburst PSM1. Now I don't have another option. I don't have the PSD1 or PS1, so I should assume that this is gonna work. I'm not gonna import this because usually it takes a while, but you can try that in your own. What I want to show you is the AAD internals. So if I go with AAD internals, now notice here that we have two modules and a bunch of PS1s. So I have PS1, I have PSD1, I have PSM1. So which one do I import? Again, go read the documentation, but let's say you want to go with the lazy approach. Let's try. Let's see which one works. So if I do PSD1 and I hit enter, and meanwhile I'm gonna just open another session. So that looks like it worked. So I can do something like invoke AAD internal, and let's say recon as outsider. Here we go, it works. So that was using the PSD1. What if I use the PSM1? So I'm gonna go import module AD internals and AD PSM1, right? This is what we used before, PSD1. Now we're using PSM1. Let's see if that's gonna work. And invoke AAD internal. See, it doesn't look like it's working, right? So if I copy this just to make sure that I'm not doing any typos, doesn't work. Yeah. So with microburst, PSM1 worked. With AAD internals, it didn't. There's a reason for that. Obviously, again, I don't want to go into the details. The point of this, what I want to drive home is, if I had read the documentation, which I did, but let's assume I didn't. If I go and read the documentation later on, I'll find out that I can actually install this as opposed to just importing. So I can do something like install module AAD internals, and that's gonna go get pulled from the internet and get installed properly without me having to do any importing and whatnot. I'm gonna say no to this because I don't want to install it for now, but when you're done, you will have the tool up and running in your environment. Okay, let us close this and clear this up. So hopefully that gives you a good idea on how to import and invoke PowerShell tools that you are using from a third party. If some smart ethical hacker has created a tool and they share it, you want to use it, this is how you use it. Usually in our trainings, we do a quick mission at the end of each section. After a bit of theory or a bit of practical exercises, we do a bit of a small mission that we challenge our students to try and solve on their own. So this is your mission for this video. First, try to find out what's the alias for the select object. Second, try to find out what's the alias for the where object. And third, try to sort out the SVC host process by the highest CPU utilization. Give that a try. See if you can figure it out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the solution in the next 2 slides. There are 2 ways you can do this, probably more. But what I want to share with you is the fact that you can do this in a quick, short way or a longer way that is more self-explanatory. And usually, whenever I'm working with beginners or newcomers to information security or cybersecurity, I do prefer the longer, more self-explanatory way because it's easier for them to understand. So give yourself a minute, try to figure it out, and then let's move on to the solution. And here's what the solution looks like. So hopefully by going through the video, all of this now makes sense when you look at it. So we're starting by getting the process, and then we are, from the output, we are selecting a name that is equivalent or equal to SVC host. But that's not enough, right? We want from this output with the SVC host to select the CPU column and use that output as input to the sort object. So this is the longer way, which is, if you are, basically think of it, if you are starting from scratch, this is how you build it up. The other shorter way of doing this is by running the get process, specifying the parameter of the name, so selectively selecting the SVC host process, and then feeding that into the sort using the pipe. Okay, now obviously to get to this, you would have had a little bit of practice. You still remember that you can use these parameters or arguments, and then you can take this output and pipe it into another commandlet. And with that, we reached the end of our video. We covered quite a bit. I hope it wasn't too much or too overwhelming. These are the absolute must-have essentials in PowerShell. You have to know this if you want to work with any Windows environment, if you are interested in learning pen testing for Windows, for Active Directory, for Azure, etc. You have to know these PowerShell basics. I hope you found this helpful. If you found this a little bit too much, make sure that you go through the video again, practice a little bit. Practice makes perfect. And if you liked the video, if you enjoyed it, make sure that you share it with your friends and colleagues, and I will see you soon in another video.